Hello and welcome to Soul's Compass Healing. My name is Brianne and I sincerely welcome you to this space. Today we are discussing the Sagittarius Full Moon happening on June 11th. And before I get into it, I want to let y'all know that if you enjoy this type of content, this type of discussion where we are getting into the evolutionary nature of everything, might I suggest you join Timothy Halloran's Astro School. So I'll put the link in the description of this video. There you can learn what and why your life is the way that it is yourself. So it's approachable, it's affordable, and it's applicable to your everyday life. It can be the biggest support for your unique evolutionary journey that is possible to find. And so I highly suggest it, and I'm very excited to be hosting study groups within the Astro School, where we will be meeting together in a supportive group environment to practice the science of observing what is going on in our real life and correlating that to the astrology so that we can understand the evolutionary nature of what it is that we are going through, and therefore can find out for ourselves and with each other more about ourselves, what we are leaning into for our evolutionary journey. And so this can be a great support as well as a wonderful education opportunity. And so later on this month, we are going to be kicking off a series of 5 meetings that is all centered around the Cancer lunation. So we're going to be tracking the moon throughout its Cancer season this year, observing our own real life experiences, and the moon is a very literal way to see how the astrology is reflected in our life. And so by using this celestial teacher that is physically the closest to us and is the filter through which the rest of the astrology is felt, we can evolve more, we can learn more, and we can really be growing through our emotional body. And that is what Jeffrey Wolf Green taught, is that we evolve through the emotional body, which is the archetype of the moon. And so I'll put the link in the description below. If you're interested in hearing more about that, you can visit my website, soulscompasshealing.com/learning. And I am very excited about the Sagittarius full moon. It has got a lot going on, and I'm gonna break it off bit by bit here. It's a Sagittarius moon that is squaring the moon's nodes. So in evolutionary astrology, the moon's nodes reflects our past evolutionary journey and what we are leaning into for our evolutionary journey. And hence why we evolve through the emotional body. They are the moon's nodes. And so when we are thinking about the moon archetype, mixing that with the Sagittarius archetype, which can be a lot about expansion, abundance of what? Not always good things. Like a magnifying glass over something, and an illumination, right? The 9th house comes after the 8th house, which can often be going into shadow. And so there can be an illumination of these deep emotional security patterns. And this is one of the fundamental bases of evolutionary astrology. There's a reason why there's a core framework in evolutionary astrology. There's a reason for everything, but yeah, why it's Pluto and the moon's nodes is because of this evolutionary necessity for us to be within security. And what offers security? What is familiar? What is known? And so for us, in order to evolve, there is inherently this dynamic tension between our familiar, known mode of operation, what gives us security, And that those can be healthy patterns and unhealthy patterns, helpful or unhelpful. And in order to evolve, it's like we have to get uncomfortable. We have to try things out that we aren't used to doing. And this is why Pluto can feel like such a force for people, that evolutionary force that sometimes is like knocking at our door or blowing the door down with certain life circumstances that more or less force us to try something new, right? And so with this moon squaring the nodal axis, we would best be using this time to really refine our understanding of our own dynamic tensions within our own security patterns, like that which we're like really comfortable with doing, but also really sick of. Because this moon is to be integrated through the South Node in Virgo, right? So it has a lot to do with discernment. And whenever the Sagittarius archetype comes up, especially given the whole wheel of astrology at this time, we are very much forced to look at, because I'm speaking in these videos to the collective, right? So in the collective psyche, there is entrenched within us a normalization of cult dynamics. That is what we are used to. We are used to outsourcing to someone else, shaping our ego. Moon correlates to ego, right? If we don't have a healthy self-image of ourselves, of what we're comfortable with doing, what we're not, knowing that line, right? Then we are very, 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 very vulnerable to getting sucked into someone else who is maybe posing as a good Samaritan or a healer or a teacher that perhaps is in that position and giving themselves that title in order to fill a void, right? It's like they've kind of decided, cult leaders at one point or another, that they've done enough healing work and they are now certified to heal others. And this is not something that is, in my opinion, to be determined by the individual, and to to be operating in that way, right? Because healing is a cyclical journey. It's more or less goes on for infinity, really. And so often what we have going on in the cult dynamics is this demonization of ego, and there is a purposefulness behind that. And that is because if everyone is told to abandon their own securities, right? Their own self-image that gives them a healthy sense of security and being who they are in the world, then people are much more likely to be obedient, to be taken advantage of, to merge with the ego of the leader, and to have a sense of selflessness around that. And so it's a way to gain power and control over followers. And yeah, we live in a culture, in a society where there are so many people who have a misunderstanding of what ego is. It actually is something to be nurtured. It has a lot to do with the inner child and healing those wounds. And the reason for this is that the more healthy and in tune we are with our ego and our fundamental security patterns, the less likely we are to follow blindly what other people tell us to do, think, or say. And so if a community is actually supportive, there is going to be a focus on each and every person being their own self-healer. Each and every person having their own individual, healthy self-image formed. They're on their own individual evolutionary journey, and there is no one size fits all. And so when we look to the fact that this moon in Sagittarius, therefore ruled by Jupiter, I hope that this noisy train isn't too intense. Jupiter is entering Cancer on June 9th, so right before this full moon, which is really quite profound because we have Mercury, the ruler of the moon's south node, conjunct Jupiter at the time of this full moon. Mercury will be entering Cancer on June 8th. And interestingly, Mercury and Jupiter are squaring Neptune, who's the ruler of our north node, and Saturn, who just entered Aries. So, this brings up the question for the collective right now, as we are, as I alluded to in the last video, we are in a phase where we are seeing, on a political scale, humanitarian rights being absolutely gutted. And so this is essentially a war against people who often are termed like the vulnerable populations, people who are basically people who aren't in the preferred elite class, right? And so when we have this situation going on in the collective where there are policies coming into play one after the next, new laws being passed one after the next, that enforces us to stand up and fight for our rights. This is a very important time for us to be thinking, okay, what do we do differently? You know, with this first quarter square of these rulers and Jupiter that I'm speaking to. It's like, we might not know exactly what the quote-unquote best thing to do is to remedy the situation. However, anything is better than sinking into the background and disappearing and being in freeze and throwing our hands up in the air and just not caring anymore. Like, if you're doing anything other than that, good job. Right? Like, we can very much be feeling a lot of pressure around what to do, and the fact of the matter is, it does not need to be perfect. Obviously, the world is very far from perfect. We need to be showing up in our healthy sense of ego and who we are and what we are not willing to sacrifice. You know, like, it's about integrating our ego and becoming aware of that which we that which we are like, yeah, it might be easier in the short term to let this all slide, but that's when the landslide really comes down. It's not going to be easier in the long term. So again, it's on a more interpersonal level, it's very important for us to be encouraging one another to integrate our ego, like asking and checking in on one another, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Where are your emotions at? Like, because a lot of us can go back into those default security modes, which I said is basically like the dog rolling over, belly up, like whatever. And so it takes us actually checking in on each other and being like, hey, like, what are you feeling? How's it going? And it's very important to do that because these security patterns, as I'm speaking to, they dictate our behavior, right? And right now, our behavior, the actions, the choices that we make are really, really important. Just as much as the actions that we don't take are. And so this is why we need safe spaces with this understanding that I'm speaking to of how our security patterns can have such a hold on us and can really limit our behavior from going into new evolutionary pathways. And this is exactly what the collective is being called to do with Neptune and Saturn at the first degrees of Aries. They'll be doing that dance for the next, I don't know, up until February of next year, but it's like there is a new evolutionary major path being carved out here for the collective. And yeah, very important that we have the safe spaces to emotionally digest what's going on so that we can respond, so that we can be empowered to do something. And so other things that I want to mention is that there's a sexy square between Juno retrograde in Scorpio is at the apex of a sexy square with Jupiter and and Mercury and this Neptune Saturn that I'm talking about. And so there's something to be said about the fact that we can be having massively intense lessons around the evolutionary nature and intention of relationships. And there are cycles in relationships that are there for a reason. This sort of conditioning that we have, where we are led to believe that we are meant to be finding our other half, and we're meant to be with people who are exactly like us and merge with them in close proximity, and this like deep level intimacy where we lose ourselves in the other. I mean, like, that's what's glamorized in our culture. That's what we are conditioned to want. And what I'm suggesting is that with this retrograde and with these aspects going on, there can be some massive lessons that that can be removing those rose-tinted glasses, because what is actually happening within that dynamic is there is, coming back to this security, right, of the ego, there is this outsourcing of security to the other person and a dependency created on other people. And this is of course natural to happen to a certain degree and in certain areas of relationships. However, when it's like this full-blown dependency on one another, we lose our sense of ourselves. We lose our sense of being an individual. And this is where it comes into another aspect that we have going on, which is Chiron trine Mars. And because what I just spoke to is so much the collective conditioning, at least within my culture, there can be a lot of wounding around that, right? And what I really want to say about Chiron wounding is that our wounds are all unique, even though we can observe these overarching cultural or societal conditionings and woundings. There are different ways that is felt, experienced, to varying degrees for every single person, right? And so we all have our individual wounding journey with that to some degree or another. And that means that we all have an individual healing journey as well. right? And this is where the approach of evolutionary astrology, or at least how I approach it, comes into play, where I very much so, because of my social work background, can see the overarching cultural conditioning or collective psyche stuff going on. And at the same time, this is an individual evolutionary journey that we are all on. And so there is a needing to honor that, right? And so this is, again, why I'm coming back to this shadow Sagittarius dynamic of cults, where, like, if anyone tells you that you just, like, follow their whatever step program and can be healed, like, maybe, but the healing journey is very individual. And evolutionary astrology can really, really help illuminate what that is for each and every soul. What else do we have going on? Venus is opposing, she's square Pluto, okay, and she's opposing Vesta at the time of this full moon. And so this can be, again, speaking to relationships, illuminating the underbelly of relationships and what devotion means in relationships, right? So this, again, is signifying certain events happening that might potentially catalyze change towards an inner sense of dependence, an inner sense of security. Yeah. What else do we have going on? Jupiter, yeah, I don't know. Mars is entering Virgo on June 17th. The Sun is going to be squaring the Moon's nodes on June 13th. So there's, the next couple of weeks is going to be dynamic tensions for sure. And the key of what this full moon is introducing is this Jupiter in Cancer transit, which is really going to, like I said, be highlighting one of the main forces of evolution, which is evolving through our emotional body. So I am so excited to talk more about that at the next video, which will be on the Cancer new moon. And in the meantime, take care of one another. As I said, check in with one another so that we can be sure that we each stay on our own evolutionary tracks, as well as standing up and fighting for what is right in the collective.